They said I didn't survive the accident, that my heart stopped on the way to the hospital, that there was nothing they could do. I remember hearing those words, but I also remember opening my eyes. Not to light, not to voices, to silence. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, but I could hear everything. The doctor called it a miracle that I was still alive. My family called it impossible. And while I lay there, trapped inside my own body, they made a decision for me. They declared me dead. 3 days later, I woke up fully. And the first thing I asked was simple. Has my funeral happened yet? The room went quiet. No one answered. That's when I knew something was very wrong. I didn't go home. I didn't call anyone. Instead, with the help of one nurse who believed me, I stood at the back of a small church, hidden behind dark glass, and watched people mourn me. My mother cried loudly. My sister held her arm. And my husband didn't cry at all. He stood there calm, relieved, holding another woman's hand. As prayers filled the room, I listened. To whispered conversations. To careless words people only say when they believe the dead can't hear. That was faster than expected. Now everything belongs to him. At least it's finally over. Standing at my own funeral, I realized something terrifying. The accident didn't kill me, but someone had wanted it to. And if I walked back into their lives too soon, they would finish what they started. So I made a choice. I stayed dead. Because before I came back to life, I needed to know exactly who had buried me on purpose. Don't skip this story, because the truth I heard that day changed everything. The last thing I remember before the crash was my husband's voice. Not worried, not urgent, annoyed. You're driving too fast, he said, without even looking at me. His eyes were on his phone. Again, I remember tightening my grip on the steering wheel, feeling that familiar pressure in my chest, the kind that comes from swallowing words you're tired of explaining. I'm not, I said quietly. That was the moment the headlights appeared. Too close. Too bright. And then, nothing. They told me later the impact was brutal. Metal twisted. Glass everywhere. The kind of accident people don't usually walk away from. I didn't walk away. I didn't die either. I hovered somewhere in between. I could hear voices long before I could feel my body. Fragments at first. Severe head trauma. Pulse is weak. We're losing her. Someone shouted my name. Someone else said a time. I tried to scream. Nothing happened. I tried to move my fingers. Nothing. Panic surged, but my body stayed perfectly still, like it no longer belonged to me. They called it a coma. Later, they would call it non-responsive. What they didn't know was this. I could hear everything. I heard my husband in the hallway. Not crying. Not breaking down. Asking questions in a calm, controlled voice. Is there any chance she'll wake up? A pause. Then the doctor said something I will never forget. It's unlikely. If she survives, she may never regain full consciousness. Another pause. Longer this time. Then my husband said quietly. So, what happens next? Not how can I help her? Not what can we do? Just, what happens next? I wanted to believe that meant he was in shock. I wanted to believe grief makes people sound strange. But then I heard my sister. My own sister. She wouldn't want to live like this, she said softly. She always said that. That was a lie. I never said that. They talked about machines. About support. About paperwork. I listened as my life became a discussion. A decision. A problem that needed resolving. At some point, a nurse said, "We should wait. It's too soon." My husband sighed. Audibly. "How long?" he asked. 24 hours. Maybe more. Another sigh. Disappointed. That's when fear turned into something else. Not panic. Clarity. Because panic assumes danger is coming. Clarity realizes danger is already in the room. Hours passed. Or maybe days. Time didn't exist in that place. But I remember one thing perfectly. A doctor saying, "Time of death 2:14 a.m., and then a sheet being pulled over my face. I screamed inside my head. I screamed until it hurt. Until I realized. They weren't mistaken. They weren't confused. They were done waiting. I didn't know how long I stayed like that. Declared dead. Still listening. But I do know this. When I finally woke up for real, the world had already moved on without me. And the people closest to me had already chosen what my absence would give them. That was when I understood something terrifying. The accident didn't just happen to me. It solved a problem. And I was the problem. I woke up to the sound of a heart monitor. Slow. Steady. unmistakably alive. For a moment, I thought the funeral had been a nightmare. That everything I'd heard, the whispers, the decisions, the word dead, had all been part of some twisted dream. Then I tried to move, and realized my body still didn't fully belong to me. A nurse noticed first. She froze when she saw my eyes open, like she was looking at something that wasn't supposed to happen. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Can you hear me?" I blinked. Once. Her hand flew to the call button. Within minutes, the room filled with doctors speaking too carefully, too quietly. Words like unexpected, rare, remarkable floated above me. No one called my husband. Not yet. When they finally got me alone, one doctor leaned in close. "You were declared deceased due to cardiac arrest following severe trauma," he said gently. "But your brain activity never fully stopped. You were missed. Missed. Like a detail on a form." I asked the question that mattered. In a voice that felt like it came from someone else's body, I said, "Did they tell my family?" The room went quiet. The nurse answered instead, "Yes." "And my funeral?" Another pause. "Yes." Something inside me went very still. Not fear. Not shock. Acceptance. Because a terrible truth had just settled into place. If I walked back into my life right now, the people who had already benefited from my death would panic. And panic makes people dangerous. They told me my husband had already signed documents. Insurance. Assets. Consent forms. They told me my sister had been very helpful. They didn't tell me details. They didn't have to. I could hear the shape of the betrayal. I asked for one thing. Time. Not to recover. To observe. There was one nurse who didn't look away when I spoke. Her name was Claire. She didn't ask questions she didn't want the answers to. When I told her I didn't want my family notified yet, she hesitated, then nodded. "People who rush death," she said quietly, "usually rush truth too." I was moved to a private recovery room under a different name. Officially, it was for my protection. Unofficially, it gave me space. Space to think. Space to remember things I had ignored for years. My husband's impatience. My sister's sudden financial struggles. The argument we'd had the week before the accident, about changing my will. I had laughed it off then. I wasn't laughing now. Claire helped me do something strange. She helped me watch my own funeral footage. Security cameras from the church. Phone videos posted by distant relatives. I watched myself be mourned. I watched my mother collapse into tears. And then I watched my husband whisper something to my sister that made her nod. Calmly. Efficiently. Like a deal closing. I didn't cry. Because grief is for the dead. I was alive. And alive people plan. I asked Claire one last favor. "I need to see who feels safest now that I'm gone," I told her. She understood immediately. 2 nights later, wrapped in borrowed clothes, hair hidden beneath a hood, I stood at the back of the church hall where they were holding a family gathering. I stayed in shadow. I listened. And what I heard confirmed everything. Relief. Plans. Careless jokes. My husband talking about selling the house. My sister asking how long before the insurance cleared. Someone saying, "At least she didn't suffer." Someone else replying, "At least it's over." That was the moment I made my decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. I wouldn't return to my life screaming that I was alive. Because if they thought death had solved their problems, I would let them believe it had. For a little longer. Because before I came back from the dead, I needed to know exactly who had buried me with intention, and who would try to do it again, if given the chance. Being dead gave me something I'd never had while alive. Freedom. No expectations. No explanations. No one watching what I said, what I wore, how I reacted. To the world, I no longer existed. And that made people careless. I stayed hidden for weeks. Recovering slowly. Learning to walk without dizziness. Learning to listen without reacting. Claire helped me more than she should have. She didn't ask for details. She didn't try to be heroic. She just believed me. And belief, I learned, is rarer than loyalty. From my hospital room, I watched my old life continue. Social media didn't stop. Condolences turned into silence. Silence turned into normal posts. My husband smiling in group photos. My sister traveling, suddenly, comfortably. They weren't grieving. They were adjusting. Insurance cleared faster than expected. That detail mattered. It meant someone had pushed. Someone had been prepared. I accessed my old email through a backup device Claire brought me. I didn't read everything. I searched. Keywords. Dates. Attachments. That's when I found it. An email sent 2 days before the accident. From my sister. To my husband. Subject line: if anything happens. My hands went cold. They talked about contingency plans. About power of attorney. About beneficiaries. About how she never checks the fine print anyway. They didn't talk like people afraid of loss. They talked like people managing risk. The accident report came next. Official. Clean. But something felt wrong. The timing. The location. The truck that hit me belonged to a subcontractor that no longer existed. The driver couldn't be found. I wasn't paranoid. I was finally paying attention. I asked Claire to help me get one thing. My phone records. The last calls before the crash. There it was. A call from my husband. 8 minutes long. Ending exactly 30 seconds before impact. I remembered that call. He had told me to turn back. To take a different route. One I never usually took. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because I was angry. Not explosive anger. Focused anger. The kind that sharpens decisions. I understood something now. The accident hadn't been random. And my death hadn't been inconvenient. It had been necessary. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Because evidence without context can be dismissed. And truth without patience gets buried again. Instead, I watched. I let them grow comfortable. I let my husband move another woman into our house. I let my sister access accounts she'd never had before. I let them believe the story had ended. I began documenting everything. Screenshots. Recordings. Timelines. Not to expose them. To understand them. One night, weeks later, I heard something that changed the pace. Claire came into my room, pale. "They're reopening the estate," she said quietly. "Why?" I asked. "Because your sister filed a claim saying the will might not be valid." I laughed. Actually laughed. They weren't just relieved I was dead. They were fighting over what I left behind. That's when I knew. They would destroy each other without my help. All I had to do was give them space. And one final nudge. I sent one message. Anonymous. Short. To my sister. "He's not as careful as you think." Then another. To my husband. She kept copies. I didn't threaten. I didn't accuse. I planted doubts. Within days, cracks appeared. Arguments turned public. Lawyers got involved. Stories stopped matching. They started watching each other. Distrusting. Panicking. And panic makes people confess. Or make mistakes. Sometimes both. I wasn't ready to return yet. But I was close. Because the truth was rising. And soon, staying dead wouldn't protect me anymore. It would endanger me. So I prepared. Not for revenge. For revelation. Because when I walked back into their lives, I didn't want them shocked. I wanted them exposed. I didn't come back quietly. I came back correctly. The meeting was scheduled under the guise of estate clarification. My sister had requested it. My husband had agreed. Lawyers. A notary. 2 witnesses. Everyone thought it was about money. That's how they walked into the room so confidently. I arrived last. The door opened. And for 3 full seconds, no one breathed. My sister's face drained of color, so fast, she actually reached for the chair. My husband stood up so abruptly his coffee spilled across the table. Someone whispered my name like they'd seen a ghost. I smiled. "Hello," I said calmly. "Sorry I'm late." My husband's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You're dead," he said hoarsely. "So I was told," I replied. "Turns out, I'm very bad at staying that way." The lawyer looked between us, confused. "Is this some kind of mistake?" "No," I said. "This is a correction." My sister started crying. Immediately. Loud. Shaking. Convincing. "I thought you were gone," she sobbed. "We mourned you." I looked at her carefully. "You mourned fast," I said. "And spent even faster." The room shifted. The air thickened. My husband finally found his voice. "This is insane," he snapped. "You can't just walk in here and—" "Sit," I said quietly. He did. That surprised him. I laid the documents on the table. Phone records. Emails. Insurance timelines. The accident report with annotations. One by one. Slowly. I wanted them to understand what was happening. "Before we talk about money," I said, "we need to talk about intent." The lawyer frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I continued, "that my death wasn't an accident." My sister stopped crying. That's how I knew. I played the recording. My husband's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. Telling me to take a different route. telling me it would be faster. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. That proves nothing, my husband said weakly. Then let's continue, I replied. I showed them the email. Subject line, if anything happens. My sister stood up. You went through my private messages. You went through my life, I answered. We're even. The lawyer pushed his chair back. I think we need to pause this meeting. No, I said calmly. We're almost done. I turned to my husband. Do you want to explain why you signed insurance documents before my body was even released? He looked at the table. Didn't answer. Then I turned to my sister. Do you want to explain why you filed a claim challenging my will after my funeral? She shook her head. Still silent. Silence is loud when it's cornered. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I let the evidence speak. Because truth doesn't need volume. It needs timing. When I finished, I looked at the lawyer. I'll be filing a formal report, I said. Today. And everything discussed here will be included. My husband finally broke. You planned this, he whispered. You stayed away on purpose. Yes, I said. Because when people think they've won, they stop hiding. Security arrived shortly after. Someone had called. Not me. Fear makes people betray each other quickly. As they were escorted out for questioning, my sister looked back at me. Her voice cracked. You could have come back sooner. I met her eyes. And you could have loved me enough not to replace me. I walked out alone. Not shaking. Not crying. Because the hardest part wasn't exposing them. It was accepting that the people who should have protected me were the ones who needed protecting from. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Clearer. I wasn't finished. But the story was no longer theirs to control. And for the first time since the accident, I wasn't surviving. I was directing the ending. The legal process didn't explode the way people imagine. There were no dramatic arrests that same day. No handcuffs. No shouting. Just consequences. Slow. Relentless. Unavoidable. Within hours of that meeting, everything froze. Accounts. Properties. Pending transfers. The lawyer who had been so eager to clarify the estate suddenly stopped returning my husband's calls. The tone shifted. People who had smiled at him for months now spoke in careful sentences. The police contacted me that evening. Not aggressively. Not skeptically. Respectfully. That mattered. They asked me why I waited. I told them the truth. Because dead people are honest witnesses, I said. No one lies when they think the story is finished. They didn't argue. They took notes. The accident was reclassified. Then reopened. Then escalated. The subcontractor company dissolved months earlier? A shell. The missing driver? Paid in cash. The route change? Documented. Patterns formed quickly once someone bothered to look. My husband was questioned first. He tried charm. Then confusion. Then anger. He said I was dramatic. That I was imagining things. That grief had made me unstable. That argument collapsed when the phone records were laid out. My sister went next. She cried again. Different this time. Not for me. For herself. She said she never meant for me to die. Just to be gone. To stop complicating things. To stop asking questions. To stop existing where I stood in her way. That confession made the room go very quiet. I wasn't in the room when she said it. I didn't need to be. I already knew. The media never got the full story. They never do. They called it a suspicious accident. A family dispute. I didn't correct them. Truth doesn't need an audience to be real. My husband was arrested 3 months later. Conspiracy. Insurance fraud. Reckless endangerment resulting in severe harm. Not murder. Not yet. Because proving intent takes time. And time was something I had learned how to use. The day he was taken in, he asked to see me. I agreed. Not because he deserved it. Because I wanted to see what was left. He looked smaller behind the glass. Older. Tired. He tried to smile. It failed. You won, he said quietly. I shook my head. This isn't a game, I replied. It's an audit. Why didn't you just leave, he asked. If you suspected me, why not walk away? I leaned forward. Because you would have done this to someone else, I said calmly. And because walking away would have let you believe you were clever. He didn't answer. My sister didn't ask to see me. She sent a letter instead. 6 pages. Explaining. Justifying. Apologizing without apologizing. I read the first paragraph. Then shredded it. Some explanations are just excuses dressed as insight. When sentencing came, I didn't attend. I didn't need to watch. I already knew the outcome that mattered. They no longer controlled the story. I changed my name legally. Not to hide. To mark an ending. I sold the house. Not for closure. For distance. People asked if I felt empty afterward. I didn't. I felt accurate. Because forgiveness was never the point. Truth was. I didn't come back to heal the family. I came back to stop the lie. And once the lie collapsed, everything else followed. I still visit the church sometimes. Not to remember the funeral, but to remember the moment I stood at the back and realized I was listening to people who thought I was gone. That moment taught me something permanent. Some people don't want you dead. They just want you silent. And silence, once broken, can never be put back where it came from. People think the hardest part is surviving betrayal. It isn't. The hardest part is living after the truth is exposed. When there's no adrenaline left, no enemy to watch, no lie to fight, just silence. And yourself. After everything ended, the world didn't clap. No dramatic ending. No sense of triumph. Life simply continued. And for the first time, it continued without asking permission. I moved to a city where no one knew my name. Not my old name. Not the name whispered at my funeral. I chose a small apartment with tall windows and too much light. Because darkness no longer felt safe. Every morning, sunlight reminded me. I'm still here. I learned what freedom actually feels like. Not excitement. Not revenge. But choice. Choosing what to eat. Where to go. Who gets access to my life. Freedom isn't loud. It's quiet confidence. I stopped checking my phone for threats that never came. Stopped listening for footsteps that weren't there. Stopped expecting betrayal in every smile. Not because people became trustworthy, but because I became unafraid. Years passed. Not dramatically. Gently. I built routines. Found work that didn't define me by my past. Made friends who knew me for who I was now. Not who I used to be. Sometimes late at night, I remembered the funeral. Not with pain. With clarity. That moment, standing behind the crowd, watching people mourn a version of me they thought was gone. That was the day I truly woke up. Not from the coma. From denial. I heard about my husband's release through official channels. I felt nothing. No anger. No fear. Because he no longer existed in my world. Power only works when you're afraid to lose something. He had already lost me. My sister never contacted me again. That was her final choice. And I respected it. Some bridges burn quietly. One day, years later, I visited the ocean alone. I watched waves crash and disappear, over and over. No memory. No resentment. Just movement. And I realized something important. Survival isn't about what you escape. It's about what you refuse to carry forward. I didn't forgive them. But I didn't need to. Forgiveness is optional. Freedom is not. If there's one thing I learned from being declared dead, it's this. When people think you're gone, they show you exactly who they are. Believe them. I attended my own funeral. I heard who wanted me dead. And then I lived a life they never got to touch. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about returning on your own terms. And never allowing anyone to decide when your story ends.